So we're talking about literally millions of parcels. And these companies bet on that, on the volume. But in order to create volume, you also need to have extremely cheap prices and the lowest possible quality, because quality and compliance cost money. Temu is not doing its homework. There are millions of parcels entering into the EU, which are exposing consumers to dangers that should not be there.
They're cheap, they're fast, and they're skirting the rules. That's the European Union's preliminary take on Chinese online marketplaces like Temu and Shein. The EU said on Monday that Temu had indeed broken rules by failing to ensure safe products on its platform. The business now has time to respond before Brussels makes a final ruling. Agustin Reyna is Director General at the European Consumer Organization, or BEUC. That's a Brussels-based lobby of European consumer watchdogs. Agustin, thank you so much for joining us. Services like Temu and Shein offer very cheap, affordable goods. For consumers, that sounds like it could be a very good thing. So what exactly is the problem here?
Hi, the problem is mainly that consumers do not know that they are buying potentially unsafe products. The testing and the mystery shopping conducted by consumer organizations across Europe actually shows that many of the parcels that come into the EU, facilitated by companies like Temu and Shein, contain products that are not compliant with our rules. And that goes from toys or household appliances that are not compliant to clothes that includes chemicals that are dangerous for consumers. And even if they are extremely cheap, consumers will still expect products to be safe. And that is not the case when they buy through companies like Temu or Shein.
Can we be more concrete? What exactly are some of the examples of unsafe products that consumers have run across?
It can include, for example, toys for kids that do not comply with certain protocols and standards, and they can easily choke a baby because the pieces can detach so easily. We have also identified chargers for phones that can literally explode. We have identified clothing that contains chemicals that are banned in the European Union, and the list is extremely long. It can go also even to balloons that someone might buy online because they are cheap, but these balloons that people put in their mouth, especially kids, also contain illegal chemicals. So what we have identified is that all these products are clearly not following the European standards, and obviously the Commission was right to identify that Temu has not done enough to identify the level of risk that consumers are exposed to.
Temu said last year that it has been self-policing, that it is regulating its marketplace. What does the EU see that it's not doing, or how does it establish that it's not doing that?
It's a question of facts. Our members, so the national consumer organizations, they have been conducting testing throughout the year. I can tell you that almost on a weekly basis, I get results of different samples of products in which a significant percentage of these products are not compliant. And that goes through a whole range of products. And the question, why this is happening? And this goes to the core nature of Temu. Temu is an online marketplace. So basically, it connects traders in China with consumers in Europe. They facilitate the transaction. But under the Digital Services Act, Temu has the obligation to check whether these traders are reliable. And it's not doing enough. So what is happening as a result is that there are rogue traders in China who are producing these illegal products that people are buying here through Temu. And that is the biggest problem that we are facing right now. Temu is not doing its homework. Temu is not complying with the rules that have been designed to prevent that this product reach consumers and European households. And on a daily basis, as I was mentioning, there are millions of parcels entering into the EU, which are exposing consumers to dangers that should not be there.
We should clarify the Digital Services Act, which you just referenced there, is one part of the EU's landmark series of regulatory measures looking at online service providers. It designated Temu a very large online platform. Last year, that means that it has special obligations to police its own platform. That's any platform that has more than 45 million users, I believe, a month. And of course, there are other platforms that also designate as, or are designated as VLOPs, X, TikTok, for example. Those are also being looked at by the Digital Services Act. Just to clarify for our viewers there, if I think about a very large marketplace like Temu or Shein, how is it different from Amazon, for example? It's a massive marketplace as well. How are their methods of policing and ensuring that certain products don't get on there? Because I would imagine many Amazon products are also from different countries, from China, from maybe cheaper producers as well.
Yeah, that's correct. So our members have also identified uncompliant products that are sold through Amazon. Perhaps the slight difference, and it doesn't mean leaving platforms like Amazon off the hook, it relates to the scale. The scale and the amount of parcels that are entering into the EU coming from China is unprecedented. It's even much bigger than we can see also from other online marketplaces. So Temu has a very special responsibility, because here we're talking about potentially millions of households affected. But like you rightly pointed out, the problem of the sale of unsafe and illegal products through online platforms is a problem across the board. That concerns companies like Amazon, eBay, other online marketplaces that face their own challenges. What is also important to bear in mind, and this is something that the European Commission is investigating as well, is whether all these platforms are complying with the rules to make sure that the traders that sell through the platform are reliable. And they are traders that they are actually engaging in licit and legitimate practices. So here, of course, we can see the level of compliance is different across the ecosystem. And if the Commission open and identify these preliminary findings against Temu, is because clearly this is one of the companies that needs to do much more to better protect consumers against these illegal products.
The EU has also said that online marketplaces like Temu, like Shein, have aggressive tactics and are even easily addictive. Can you tell us what exactly do they mean?
Yes, and they mean the deployment of what we call dark patterns. So the way they design the user interface, or the disclaimers that they use to induce consumers to buy more. So for example, buy quickly or hurry up because there are only X number of products available, or there are X number of people looking at this product right now. And this is a way to induce a certain level of anxiety on people to continue buying. We have, for example, introduced a new complaint against Shein before the European Commission, the consumer protection authorities, about how they use these dark patterns or these behavioral techniques to keep people hooked in the platform, expending money, and spending much more money than actually they might be willing to spend for certain products, to the point that it's become even addictive for many consumers. And from the point of view of European laws, this can constitute unfair commercial practices, and that is illegal. You cannot push people to buy things. And there is a very fine line in the way how the platform is designed. And through the testing that we have conducted and our legal assessment, we have identified that many of these practices are illegal. And both under consumer protection rules, but also under the Digital Services Act that you mentioned earlier, there are specific provisions to tackle and address these so-called dark patterns.
Is there not a very thin line also between the kind of tactics that are seen as abusive and the tactics that you may see as more common from online marketplaces? Even Amazon offers discounts or suggests purchases that would accompany something that you're looking at. Could these not also be looked at as behavioral methods of getting someone to go ahead and purchase something or to purchase more than they technically need? How do you define what's considered abusive and what's just sales tactics?
It's an extremely fine line, and you're right to say that the assessment has to be very careful. What we have identified is that many of these practices are aggressive. So one thing is to try to convince people to buy a certain product, to provide a discount or a certain benefit, or to give a free delivery. And a different thing is to constantly bombard people with messages. Buy, 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 or if you don't buy now, you will lose this promotion. Or after you log out from the website, then you get a mail or you get a pop-up on your phone. So there are different levels of practices, and the most gross practices, I would say, that can become unfair are those that are really affecting the decision-making power of consumers. Because under EU law, consumers have a right to make an informed decision. But when you are bombarded with all these messages, with all these tricks, you might fall in the traps of continue buying. And that is when your decision-making process is being affected. But like you say, and that is absolutely correct, this is a case-by-case assessment. And when we did our report on these practices, we look exactly at how these practices influence the consumer behavior in a way that the consumer does not realize that is being manipulated.
We should note that it's not just Chinese companies here. Amazon has just introduced a cheap online marketplace called Haul in Europe. I believe it's still in beta with low-price products that's very similar to Temu or Shein. Is the EU not facing an uphill battle as more of these online marketplaces duke it out with one another, essentially?
Indeed. We see the proliferation of these online marketplaces selling extremely cheap products. Selling a cheap product per se is not illegal. What is illegal is to sell a cheap product which is non-compliant with our standards. But of course, there are other considerations that come into play. For example, environmental considerations. Because when a consumer, for example, buys a cheap product online that contains illegal chemicals, that is bad for the consumer, obviously, because it's exposed to these chemicals. It's bad for the environment because it contaminates. And it probably also has societal considerations because this product had been produced outside Europe in unhealthy conditions for the workers. So this requires a much more holistic and a broad approach than just the prices. It's much more complex than that. And we need to look at the entire supply chain and how these cheap products are being produced and how they reach the European households.
So it's not just the prices that make something sort of prohibited under EU rules. At the same time, do you believe that these business models are really viable without breaking EU rules? Can you really have cheap online marketplaces like we're seeing without, frankly, going around all of these rules? Do you think that's even possible?
Someone will afford the costs. And that cost could be from an environmental cost, from a social cost, safety cost, you name it. And these companies, they bet on volume. Temu doesn't make all the money that it makes on a few parcels, it's on the volume. And just to give you an idea, since Temu entered into the EU market, the number of parcels that have entered Europe have doubled each year. So we're talking about literally millions of parcels. And these companies bet on that, on the volume. But in order to create volume, you also need to have extremely cheap prices and the lowest possible quality, because quality and compliance cost money. So therefore, one also needs to consider that behind this business model, there are many different costs which are associated. And from the point of view of the European Union and the response of the regulators, they need to look into that as well. Because while we are asking our European companies to comply with our rules, not only in relation to consumer safety or chemicals, but also in relation to social protections or environmental protections, all these have a cost. So if we are asking our European companies to comply, we should ask the same to those that are also Europe, that they are making business in Europe. And that is where I believe not only the European Commission, but also the member states, they will have to be extremely clear. If you want to do business in Europe, you play by our rules.
94 million monthly users for Temu in the EU. That's massive. Could not the EU do something similar to the US and essentially make the price of shipping more expensive for some of these low-cost shippers? I know this has been discussed, perhaps adding €2 per package onto it. How do you see that?
That's correct. That was a possibility as part of the discussion to make this the shipping a bit more expensive. Now the question is how a company will react, because for the same, Temu can say they absorb the cost of this additional €2. But even if we will make it a bit more expensive, then the question is how the consumers are going to react. You make it expensive to be prohibitively expensive for the consumer to buy, or the consumer will still be able to pay this additional cost. But what I found interesting in this discussion is that making it expensive, for example, with this levy that could be applied, is to fund the customs. But the reality is that while we need a stronger customs to prevent illegal products to enter Europe, we cannot pretend that the customs are going to open all these millions of parcels that enter on a daily basis. So even if you will make the shipping slightly more expensive, you're not going to address the problems of the illegality of these products that are entering in a massive scale. What we believe the EU needs to do is to tackle the problem at its source, and that is the platform. The platform should be held accountable. And right now, that's not the case. It's not Temu that is held accountable for the illegal products that it's selling. It's the sellers or the traders through Temu. Temu has certain obligations, obviously, to ensure that the traders are reliable, but they are not held accountable for the products that they are selling. And there we believe that we should change the approach. We should make Temu the importer and not the individual right. consumer, who then bears and hold the responsibility over what he or she is buying through these platforms.
Well, we know that the EU, if the preliminary findings of its investigation are upheld, then it could ultimately lead to a fine of up to 6% of Temu's annual global turnover, which sounds quite large. Would that make an impact on the platform, do you think?
It could have a disciplinary effect. Fines also have a disciplinary effect to make sure that the company can comply with. We can also not forget that there can be also periodic penalties. So if the company does not change the behavior, then there can be new fines that are being added. And that is where the behavior of a company will have to change. We obviously believe that the Digital Services Act can play an important role alongside consumer protection rules, because there is a parallel investigation on Temu on the grounds of consumer protection. What we need to make sure is that the sanctions that are going to be imposed are deterrent enough, and that the remedies that they will be imposed will ensure that if Temu was to operate in Europe, which Europe is open for business, and is the political approach that has been taken by the European Union, we need just to make sure that they comply with our rules like any other European company.
Agustin, I want to wrap up by asking about the Digital Services Act, going back to the DSA. This, of course, that new framework for holding these large online platforms accountable for their social impact. We know it's despised by the US administration and by the Republican Party in general, which sees it as targeting primarily American tech companies. We know there are investigations into X, Facebook, and then also TikTok as well. Do you have any concerns that the DSA could be threatened in this kind of back and forth trade negotiations that we have right now, that Europe has right now with the US? Is it endangered in some way?
A few months ago, that was a source of concern, especially when the US administration was targeting concretely the Digital Services Act, also alongside, for example, the Artificial Intelligence Act. The political agreement that the European Commission and the Trump administration have reached in the last days excludes any impact or any negotiations over the ability of the European Union to either legislate or to enforce its laws. And this is a very important element to bear in mind, because a few months ago, that was not for granted. We were also happy to hear the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Virkkunen, who also clearly said a few weeks ago, there is no way that we will discuss our laws in the context of a trade agreement. In a trade agreement, you discuss trade, you discuss tariffs. You don't discuss the ability of the European Union or any other country to protect its consumers, or their ability to ensure that the products and the companies that operate in a given country or in the EU are compliant and legitimate. And I think this is something extremely important to keep in mind, because fundamentally, Europe did not ask for this. This was a move unilaterally of the US administration to use tariff in order to put pressure to obtain different goals across the world. But we were pleased that the European Commission did not follow that path, and it focused on what a trade agreement should be for, and this is to discuss about trade and not other issues.
At the same time, we know that the largest imports into the EU from the US are services, and that the US could very well argue this is a trade issue. Do you really believe this is going to go away because it's not in that framework? We hear comments all the time about the DSA being akin to censorship from the US side. Clearly, this is going to be an issue, right?
It's not downplaying it. I think it will be an issue, and will probably continue to be an issue, because the DSA is being used also as a political tool in order to get leverage over Europe on certain aspects and for different political reasons, even outside the remit of trade. What we are asking is obviously to keep things separate. As we were discussing it before, the Digital Services Act, from our perspective, is there to protect consumers. If you look at the first article of this regulation, is to ensure also consumer protection and make sure that people can enjoy the online environment in a safe manner. What is in a safe manner might differ from the perspective of the US administration. No, but here in Europe, we do things differently, and we make sure that people can be protected. And regardless of the following trade talks, and you rightly pointed out that while we export a lot of goods to the US, we import a lot of services, digital services, but also banking services. So in the future, if things continue kind of in the same tone, Europe can also say, look, then we're going to impose retaliation tariffs on services. This is certainly not going to be good for the consumers in Europe neither. But Europe also has the right to defend itself against any sort of extortion as to its ability to regulate its own companies and practices, and protect obviously consumers in the Union.
All right, that's Agustin Reyna. He's Director General at the European Consumer Organization. Agustin, thank you so much.
Thank Thank you for having me.